All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining today. Looks like it is 2 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining this panel discussion in honor of World Health Day. We have a really exciting discussion planned for today, focusing on the 2025 theme of Healthy Beginnings, Hopeful Future. I'm joined by 4 speakers for today, Megan Claire Chase, Dr. Matthew Hadfield, Dr. Jasmin Hundal, and Ruthie Profit, and they have some great insights in store for you today in light of World Health Day. If anybody has any questions for our panelists, feel free to type them into the chat in YouTube, and we'll have some time to answer them throughout the discussion as well as at the end. And with that, I will turn it over to Megan Claire to start off the introductions and dive into the discussion.
All right. Hello, everyone. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then we'll go around the Zoom. Again, I'm Megan Claire Chase, aka Warrior Megsy in Cancerland. I am a 9-year invasive lobular breast cancer survivor, and I am also the breast cancer program director for Share Cancer Support. And I'm coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia. So, Dr. Matt Hadfield, let's kick it over to you for a little intro.
Going to be very, very hard to match that energy. But I am Matt Hadfield. I'm a medical oncologist at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, and I focus clinically on early phase clinical trials and cutaneous malignancies. And with that, I will turn it over to my former resident, I was your former resident. Actually, now I blocked a lot of that out, so I don't even really remember. We worked together in residency. Dr. Jasmin Hundal.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Hey, everyone. My name is Jasmin. I'm a current second-year fellow at the Cleveland Clinic, and my interest lies within breast cancer and immunotherapy and survivorship. And then I'll give it over to Ruthie.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Ruthie. I am a 4-year breast cancer survivor, but 3 years in remission since completing active treatment and resumed my work. I work as a policy analyst, and I also am here at the City of Atlanta with Megan. And we met each other initially, or I met her on social media through her advocacy when I was going through. So I thought I would start off by sharing that. And then we got to meet each other in person just a few weeks ago at a baddie breast cancer survivor caregiver advocacy event, also at its inaugural year here in Atlanta, Georgia. And so I'm very pleased and honored to join you all on this panel today. So thank you for having me.
Love it. Love it. Well, okay, y'all. It is World Health Day, and that theme of healthy beginnings, hopeful future. Like, what does that mean to you as we think about World Health Day, especially in this current climate as well? Curious, and just feel free to pop in with discussion on what does this theme mean to you? Go ahead, Ruthie.
I'll go ahead and get started. So World Health Day, along with the theme of healthy beginnings, is actually, of course, really personal to me. For someone as a cancer survivor, my life before that, I had a fairly healthy lifestyle. And so this was quite shocking for me when I got the diagnosis. And it just goes to show that while it is important to maintain your health, illness can really occur and show up at anybody's doorstep at any time, day, wherever you are in your life. But I will share that I believe, and also my health team attested to this, that the lifestyle that I led before really helped me through treatment, because I went through it all. I was diagnosed with ductal invasive carcinoma, and I was at stage 2B upon surgery because the cancer did move to my lymph nodes. I had 4 out of 9 lymph nodes removed in my underarm, and I opted for the lumpectomy, meaning that was the breast conserving surgery in which we removed the lump or the tumor that was found in the breast. And so because of that and them going in, that's what changed my stage as well. Because once you go in, typically that's when the provider can see exactly what's going on in addition to the images and the scans prior to diagnosis. And then that changed my course of treatment from surgery to chemotherapy. And I had 2 different chemotherapies that were very aggressive, and then radiation. So all of that was necessary in that order. And so when we talk about, health and healthy beginnings, I appreciate the lifestyle that I led, which was exercising, running, even meditation. All those things really helped with my healing and my treatment. And so I encourage all people just not to take your health for granted, even though you think you're good, but sometimes it's preparation for the storm that's ahead. And I'll just kind of stop right there because we could go on and on and on about that. But just preserving your health as best as you can. You don't wish this on anybody, of course not. But when it comes, sometimes, and I've heard this before, sometimes it's the treatment that takes people out and not necessarily the diagnosis, because it is that harsh and that difficult. So, kudos to all of us that are here surviving and thriving, because even post all of that, we all have a lot of issues that we still deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I totally agree with you. I feel like definitely like coming in, like if you do get diagnosed with a malignancy and coming in with a prior good, healthy lifestyle, that definitely provides you with a step up to get through the treatment as well as the post-surgical time. Because I see even in our clinic, if patients have cardiometabolic comorbidities, they definitely have a little bit of a harder time to undergo the treatment, as well as if there is an adverse effect to the treatment to overcome that. And especially if you have been active or are living like a healthy lifestyle, it's easier for you to kind of like undergo the treatment, as well as like if there are adverse effects, they might be milder than someone who comes in with pre-existing medical conditions. And also in the adjuvant setting, like, or even for upfront, like sometimes you're unable to get the treatment because you have certain comorbidities, for example, your renal function or whatnot, that prohibits you from getting a certain treatment. So I think like definitely like healthy lifestyle is definitely very, very important, even in general, to just keep up with everything.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things that we've done a really good job of in the last decade and a half is increasing the life expectancy of patients with cancer. A lot of that is secondary to the advent of immune checkpoint inhibitors. And as Jasmin was mentioning, we're starting to give these therapies in earlier and earlier stages of disease. So I speak of things in the terms of melanoma. I mean, we're giving patients with stage 2B, stage 2C immunotherapy in the adjuvant setting. And in breast cancer, we're giving adjuvant immunotherapy now too. And, the healthier patients are, the more likely they're able to tolerate the unfortunate toxicities that develop. And, we are not at a point yet as a community where we've figured out, who's going to develop toxicities, which of those toxicities are going to be severe, and who won't have toxicities. And unfortunately, that's a hurdle we're still trying to grapple with, at least in terms of immunotherapy. And I think another thing is, Ruthie had mentioned even meditation, things like that. Even dealing with that uncertainty, where you're constantly dealing with odds of, this could happen, or this is the outcome I hope will happen. We don't know for sure. Being as healthy as you can, both physically and spiritually and mentally, is incredibly important.
What I'll say is, I definitely think, going into it does help if you were already leading a healthy lifestyle, but I also don't want people to think, oh my gosh, because I, had too much wine or something, to make them feel guilty and that they deserve it because they, weren't fit when they got diagnosed. Because for me, it was totally the opposite of, I was fit, but my symptoms were causing the weight gain and hormones to go out of control, not knowing that this was breast cancer because my symptoms presented differently. And so when I think of like healthy beginnings, it's also acknowledging what your quote unquote normal is before a diagnosis, and when you notice something is wrong, and how you just keep like pushing until you get answers. And then also too, I like to say that to me, it wasn't my cancer that almost killed me. It really was the treatments. They were that toxic. And what is so scary, I think, about just any type of major health issue, especially around cancer, is you really don't know how your body is going to react. So even the fittest person you just don't know. A lot of factors go into that too, your height, your weight, etc. So just want to make sure that no one feels any type of shame or anything if you weren't totally fit when you got diagnosed. As we talk about like a hopeful future, that also makes me think about clinical trials and the hope that goes with that. And so, Matt, I want to toss that over to you to get us started on clinical trials. And what do you say to patients? And as a doctor, why are clinical trials so important?
Yeah, I think clinical trials, at least, so I focus on early phase clinical trials, and 15, 20 years ago, we really were just we're just doing dose escalation trials with chemotherapy. And now in the year 2025, we are well into the immune checkpoint inhibitor era. We have novel immunotherapeutics. We have more targeted therapies, more targets, more antibody drug conjugates, lots of different drugs that work in lots of different ways that provide so much more hope than they were used to. But they are early phase trials. We don't know if these are going to work. But there is much more hope now that patients will derive benefit in the earlier phases of trials than they ever would have, unfortunately, in the past when they were really more just safety trials. And I think in a lot of ways, we've gotten smarter with how we design early phase trials. The FDA's Project Optimus has been working on trying to really take into account patient advocacy groups in terms of providing guidance on, we don't need to get to the maximum tolerated dose anymore. We really just want to find the most efficacious dose and then carry the drug forward there. So I think there's a lot more hope now than there ever used to be. Unfortunately, lots of patients still don't derive benefits from early phase trials, but many do. So I think there's more options than there ever used to be, which is a good thing for patients.
And just in case anyone listening, can you just kind of explain what an early phase trial means?
Yeah, absolutely. So when drugs are developed, they're developed in a pipeline where we do scientific research at universities and companies and develop new drugs. And then the first time those drugs are actually evaluated in patients is in early phase trials. So considered phase 1 trials, where traditionally we would think of these as just being safety trials, where you're looking to see if there's any unexpected safety toxicities that could occur, and guiding that forward for the development of a phase 2 study, where you really start to hone in on which tumor type this would work best in. And then a phase 3 study is a very large trial where you're randomizing and hopefully proving that the therapy you developed is more effective than what's already available. The early phase trials, as I mentioned in the past, used to be pretty much just safety trials. We were hoping that patients would derive a benefit, but really we were just establishing how safe a drug was. But now with the drugs that I had mentioned, antibody drug conjugates and novel immunotherapeutics, we actually see more responses than we ever have in the past, which means that patients that are unfortunately out of all other options in terms of standard of care treatments can still potentially derive some benefit from one of these earlier phase 1 studies.
Jasmin, give us your thoughts on clinical trials, their importance, the hope, etc.
Yeah, I think especially right now, like clinical trials are very important, as there are like multiple lines of treatments already existing, but like people still progress and there's new innovation. And I feel like there's still like barriers exist, definitely like with awareness, mistrust, as well as access and logistical challenges. But I think we are, like, as a healthcare system, I think we are moving towards making it a little bit easier. For example, doing electrical consents now, like making it easier for the patients to be able to enroll in clinical trials. But I think what's really important is to definitely develop trust within our patient population, that the clinical trial is not like the last resort. I think the phrasing and the education is very important, because I feel like sometimes we feel like, oh, the clinical trial is just the last resort that the patient has, which is actually not true, because sometimes the clinical trials are run against standard of care with a medication that we think could potentially be better than the standard of care.
Ruthie, what are your thoughts on clinical trials?
So for me, I guess it came as an afterthought because when I was introduced into this world and my journey or experience started, right? It was just, again, wrapping around the treatment plan for myself. And it was a very rapid movement, not a lot of time to make decisions. You literally had like a week or two to decide, A or B and what you're going to go forward with based on the risks, right? And so for me, I think the thought of clinical trials on a personal level were not introduced, and I don't know if it was necessary, right? But in a grand scheme of things, I appreciate the fact that they're available. And to piggyback on Miss Jasmin's thoughts, it's a matter of, kind of breaking down the mistrust and just continue to have the conversation that if you're at a crossroads in your treatment or in your plan, that maybe this would be available to you. But it's a matter of making sure our provider team is aware of clinical trials. That's the first step, right? And also for us as patients or as advocates, for also educate ourselves and not hold the information in, but share what we know. Like, hey, maybe this could work with your patient population, or this could be a thought. We don't know, but take a look at it. So on a personal level, it wasn't something that was offered to me or introduced, but I don't know if it was necessary, right? Because I'm now post active treatment. And so I'm dealing with a lot of side effects. So if there are clinical trials for those, then I welcome, I'd be more than happy to explore and understand, because many of those do affect quality of life. And as neuropathy, the joint pain, and the medications that were kind of on from 5 to 10 years or some for life. While they're helpful for one thing, but then they come with high risk, and they also come with multiple side effects, which unfortunately many of us experience, right? God bless those that don't experience any side effects, and we wish that for everyone. But if there are clinical trials that address this level of or the phase that we are in treatment, again, I'd be more than happy to learn about it, and if it's something that we can share with our community, let's go forward with it.
So I want to let everyone know that I used to be totally against clinical trials, right? And then, and it's all because of the history. Like there's still such a stain on the history in terms of Black bodies, the Black community, and then other people of color, right? And so going in, I'm like, yeah, I would never do a clinical trial. What do you mean? But then after going through breast cancer, and then when it was time for me to enter that survivorship stage and take those medications to help lower risk of recurrence, well, the medications didn't work. I was having side effects that were either rare or side effects that had not yet been reported with that medication. And that's when it clicked in my head. Oh my gosh, we need representation. And now I understand like the value and the need to make sure not only that we have participants in clinical trials, but we have participants that look like me, that look like Ruthie, that look like Jasmin, like other people of color as well. And not just like a, one person, to really have that representation, because when medication all of a sudden isn't working, and I kept like pushing and pushing, we were trying so many different options. And that's when I started talking about clinical trials in a different way. And I used to get like really hurt when I would be told I did not meet the criteria of clinical trials. I'm like, what do you mean? I am perfect. It feels like dating. I mean, I felt like they were saying no, and I'm like, what do you mean? And I didn't stop though at the no. And I think that's what I want to impress upon people, patients, caregivers, etc., is just because for one clinical trial, if you sign up for it and they say, hey, you don't meet that criteria, don't let that be the end. You can keep asking questions, find out additional trials, etc., because at the end of the day, as I always like to say in all of my videos, you matter. Matt, I saw you come off mute.
No, I just think you made so many good points there that I don't even know where to begin. Unfortunately, there is a lot of mistrust around clinical trials, and I think you touched on some of the most important ones that go back decades and decades. But one that I'm actually reminded of is in the breast cancer community. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a big push at that time to give high dose chemotherapy and then bone marrow rescue. You may have be familiar with that story, but there was a good amount of falsified data in one of those trials, and a lot of women around the world were kind of caught up in the hype of what was going on, trying to get in the most cutting edge treatment. I think that raises a lot of questions or concerns to me. One is that we should never get overhyped about things because clinical trials answer those questions. But two, we have to be as transparent as possible about trials and the trial data to try and encourage broad participation. Because to your point, if we don't have diversity on clinical trials, it's very hard to extrapolate that data that we generate to the broader population that's actually going to receive the drug. And then you also mentioned eligibility criteria, and I think that's one of the most frustrating things as a clinical trialist is when you are trying to get a patient onto a trial and there is criteria that makes you ineligible. And I think just to explain that to anyone who may be listening, the eligibility criteria are largely put in place by companies at the discretion and guidance of the FDA on what makes someone deemed safe or unsafe to participate in a trial. In many of the newer drugs, there's a lot of eligibility criteria that I don't think personally make a lot of sense. And I think people are starting to raise questions around that, but I completely feel your frustration on that. It's a very, very tough thing. And unfortunately, we haven't been as adaptable to newer drugs and newer types of therapy than we have in the past.
Just want to take a moment, see if we have any questions coming in yet, or should we just continue?
Yeah, not yet. So if anybody has any, feel free to put them in, but otherwise we can keep on going.
All right. So we're gonna now kind of go into NGS testing, the wider adoption of NGS testing. So, Matt, what does that mean? Break it down for us.
NGS testing is essentially looking at the DNA and the RNA, which is the genetic makeup of your tumor, to determine if you have any mutations that may be targetable with specific types of drugs. This is something that almost paralleled the immunotherapeutic revolution, if you will. We now have dozens of different drugs that target specific mutations, and it's important because if you do not have this type of testing performed, then you may be limiting what treatment options are available. So we know there's been multiple studies that have shown that outside large academic medical centers, the uptake of NGS testing, which is now standard of care across multiple tumor types, particularly in lung cancer, for instance, but all solid tumor types. But lung cancer is one in particular where there's many indications to use targeted therapy. The uptake isn't where it should be. It's like less than half patients in some areas of the country are getting this testing. So I think from a patient perspective, if you are unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, this is something you really have to talk to your physician about. And if there is no indication to do NGS testing, like make sure you understand why, as opposed to not asking about it, because it is possible that there's therapies or trials as well that could be available depending on different types of mutations that you have.
Jasmin, see you nodding over there.
Yeah, that's definitely true. The uptake is definitely lower, especially in certain communities. We see that over and over, as well as in studies, as Matt said. And I think like even NGS testing like kind of opens up sometimes like a treatment windows like patients are eligible for, for example, sometimes like an oral pill or an immunotherapy rather than the traditional chemotherapy. So I think that's really important to do so, but also especially if they reoccur with the after like recurrence of cancer. Like I think repeat NGS testing sometimes is also very valuable because the tumor can sometimes change its characteristics and develop certain targetable mutations that were not present at the beginning, or as we know that oncology moves really fast forward, new treatments come out and new FDA approved or clinical trials are out there that are targeting, for example, certain mutations that are not very prevalent. So that's where clinical trials, for example, come in, where large academic centers or even now community offers clinical trials enrolling patients of certain mutations.
So with this type of testing, like, I mean, what is it? Like, what do you do? Like, say, hey, I've come to you, I've heard about this NGS testing. What exactly is that procedure? Can someone walk us through that?
Jasmin?
So it's usually done on the next generation NGS testing is usually done on the tissue, on the biopsy that was taken. But so it is basically just analyzes the tissue, the DNA and the RNA, and kind of undergoes like all the sequencing and processing. And then that's when the company, like there are like just 2, 3 major companies that do these NGS testing, and then they will report back what kind of mutations you have. And it usually comes in like 2 parts. Like the part 1 will be the targetable mutations, and then there will be like you will have like mutations that are present, but we don't have any medications that target those. So they are still listed on your NGS, results section, but only like the targetable one. And then it'll also provide you with suggestions to the oncologist and to you that are visible to you as well, on which medication you would be eligible because of these certain mutations.
Would this be done at the same time as a biopsy? Like, is that
Usually
when
we
it would
send
happen?
it off. Usually we send it off, like the NGS testing is usually sent off with the biopsy. For example, what usually happens is here when we, for example, in the hospital, like once a patient is newly diagnosed with a cancer, it comes back with like, let's say esophageal or lung cancer. And then the next step would be like, okay, we have to like order an NGS to see if there are any targetable mutations or not. So it is usually sent from that initial biopsy.
So Ruthie, as you're hearing this, is this your first time hearing this type of procedure? What are your thoughts?
Right, lots of them. Thanks for asking the question, Megan. Yeah, I'm thinking lots of thoughts as well because it is my first time. In preparation for the panel, I did see that we would be discussing the NGS. So that was my first time seeing it then. And it's interesting and concerning at the same time because I'm way past that point, right? So I'm thinking about that little biopsy they took 4 years ago. What did they do with it? Except for test for the actual cancer that I have. Could there have been other treatment paths, or what does that mean genetically? Now I know about a week after diagnosis, I did do the gene testing, and the BRCA came back negative. So that means that I was the first person genetically for this to happen in my family. No one else has this type of cancer. And my testing came back negative for the propensity of recurrence in that space, right? But other than that, I don't know what happened with my biopsy or my actual tissue. Surprisingly enough, you guys might chuckle at this, but I had asked after we did the lumpectomy, can I see it? Like, did they save it? Or, just out of curiosity. I mean, in the midst of the anxiety and the fear and all the feelings that you're feeling when all of this is happening, I just wanted to see the sucker. Like, you were getting evicted. It was a whole thing with my friends and my family. We called it eviction day, and gave it a name, Ashy Portia, and all these things just to kind of give some humor to a very serious situation. But we all cope in the way that we cope, right? And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to see what Portia looked like, just to lay eyes on her and just to like see the size, the color, the whatever. And my surgeon was like, no, we did not save it. We did not take a picture. You need to move on from this. You need to move on from this. So those are my thoughts. I mean, so who knows if this NGS was available to me 4 years ago, could that have changed my treatment plan? Possibly, I don't know. And that's where this conversation is so important, right? So for those that are listening, now you are here and you are been informed. I hope and pray for those that are on this call. If you are in the earliest stages, then maybe that's something you can bring up. And then for the rest of us who are past this point, now that we know, just continue to talk about it, lift it up, research it as with others to find out what other treatment options are available. I'm, I'm sure Doc can understand this. It's just like it's moving fast, right? This whole thing is moving quickly. And thankfully, we are at a stage where if we do catch these things early enough, then our prognosis has a good chance, right? Our survivorship is longer. We have a good chance at a healthy beginning, healthy future, as it relates to our theme. But all of this is just, I think the more we start to have these conversations, hopefully in these communities of color and of women and just those underserved populations, maybe we can start peeling back the layer of fear and mistrust, right? Like, hey, look at me, I've done this. Because I've met so many people since being diagnosed and sharing my story and my experience that have still told me post-pandemic they have not gotten a mammogram when they should have. Like, they've missed many mammograms up until this point. And then when I share my story, they're like, oh, I'm gonna sign up. I'm gonna, schedule an appointment, get my mammogram done, or I'm gonna make sure I do my self-exams because I found mine while I was in the shower, interestingly enough. And I had had a mammogram about 6 to 7 months prior. Again, that's the mystery, right? I don't know if it was just a tiny, less than a pea size before then, or couldn't be detected, or did it just grow overnight one day? And then that's the day that I felt it. So those are all the things, even mentally, that I have to process, sometimes even on a daily basis, like, well, did they miss it last time? Or, do I rest and give myself grace? Like, no, this is when it was supposed to have happened. That's when I felt it, and just accept that, because you can go down this rabbit hole, right, of guilting yourself. Like, I'll be like, well, did I exercise enough? Or, should I have been eating red meat? Should I have had more drinks or less drink? Like, you go through all these things, and even with all those descriptions, you can just shame yourself to
Right.
oblivion, right? And you can understand that. So, again, this is new to me, but I hope it's helpful for others.
Yeah. As my therapist likes to say, don't should all over yourself. You made the best decision that you could with the information that you had at the time. We did get a question, so I'm going to read it out loud and let our panel answer. So, why is compliance to NGS testing so low? Matt?
I think there's a number of reasons why NGS testing is not. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's low. It's just not as utilized around the country and certainly the world as it should or could be. Um, I think there's several factors that play into that. So, unfortunately, with the amazing progress that's happened with cancer therapeutics and treatments over the last decade, it's gotten incredibly complicated. So if you are an oncologist who is seeing multiple different tumor types, meaning that, maybe you see breast cancer and you also see multiple myeloma and you also see lung cancer, it's an enormous amount of things to keep on top of. So it's not that they're, necessarily, you could be outdated because something just changed like 2 weeks ago, and it's incredibly hard. So at larger centers, you have someone who's focusing on specifically breast cancer. That's all they do. They go to conferences that are breast cancer oriented. They talk to breast cancer colleagues. So they're just a little bit more on top of things that are changing in the field than outside. And that's not saying that community oncologists are not on top of things. It's just sometimes it's just there's a lag time from what changes at larger centers to community centers. And I think that's part of it. And oftentimes there's these reports will generate, as Jasmin mentioned, lots of they're called variants of undetermined significance mutations, which means that you have a mutation and we don't know what it means. And you have to, it takes time and effort to interpret those and determine if you do need to make a treatment decision based on that or not. So I think there's a lot of factors that have led to that. But I do feel like it is changing, and the NCCN guidelines certainly guide physicians to order this testing in most tumor types. So I think the future will be better than the past.
I agree. Before the NCCN guidelines, I think that it was a gray line, so it really depends on it was depend on that. But I feel like now, since it's in the NCCN guidelines and there's increased awareness as well, I think the community oncologists are also slowly adapting to it. And then also the other issue used to be reimbursement by insurances. I think that was one of the biggest barriers. I think, or I believe, with the integration into the NCCN guidelines and having like this wider recognition of the importance of NGS, I think insurances have adapted to it as well. But I think like prior authorization and not covered by insurance, all these came into a play as well. And if I'm not wrong, Matt, the NGS has to be ordered around the time of diagnosis, or like isn't there a certain loophole, right? Like with coverage, like if it is
Yeah.
ordered after a certain time.
I mean that no, that's a great point. That there is definitely insurance issues, and I think that's another thing I would say that may be one of the larger issues too, is that there's multiple different ways to order NGS testing. So it's not as if it's not a local lab. So there's as Jasmin mentioned earlier, there's multiple companies, and each company has different processes for the paperwork that's required, what their company will pay for if insurance doesn't pay for things, and what that really all translates into is that the support staff that you have at your center has to handle that burden of really ordering the testing. So like as the physician or the provider, you say, I want to get NGS testing, send X company's kit. Then your nurse navigator or someone has to do that. And unfortunately at smaller places, they're very resource strapped. I mean, at larger centers we are, but and that's a barrier as well. And to Jasmine's point, sometimes insurance won't cover it.
I mean, insurance, right? And that's what's frustrating. And then, when thinking about those smaller community hospitals and rural areas, and how do we make sure that every patient is getting the best care, the standard of care, and staying up to date on everything. And we did just receive another question, so I'm going to read that out loud. How can community oncologists and their patients stay updated on the latest advances? And that's in regards to, clinical trials, etc. What are some things that they can do? Jasmin.
Yeah, I think like national conferences, as for example, ASCO is coming up. Usually that like all these big conferences like ASCO, ASH, San Antonio Breast Conference, for example. So each disease group usually has a separate smaller important conference as well, in addition to the big ASCO, like ASCO GU, ASCO GI, and so on. So one is that venue, but it can definitely be overwhelming, especially for an everyday patient to understand the lingo. Then there are also, I believe, NCCN has a patient-facing portal as well, which does explain the treatment algorithm and the diagnosis algorithm for the patients, and then as well as for the community oncologist. The NCCN guidelines does provide step-by-step breakdown on the diagnosis and treatment. And last but not least, I think like social media, like Twitter, LinkedIn, or all these venues are also great platforms where oncologists, where one can follow oncologists that are key opinion leaders, because they usually will post and explain the new advancements if something comes up.
I agree with you in saying like there's value in social media. I mean, that is ultimately how Ruthie and I got connected, and like you said, there are key opinion leaders out there that will share latest updates. But of course, something that I think is important to mention too, especially if you don't have the budget to go to any of these conferences, or can't get a travel scholarship, there are some virtual ways that you can also take part and still learn about what was discussed and what the latest research is showing. So it's like there are a multitude of ways to get this information. I think it's just a matter of time, right? Like, do we have time for this? But, and also not being afraid to ask the questions. And I am talking about that from like a patient point of view, because, not all patients are in the science field. Not all think in that way, and that is okay. But darn it, I may not be a doctor, but I sure did become a doctor in my body. And anytime I had an idea or a question, I made sure I would ask it. And sometimes my physician hadn't heard about that yet, or I'm bringing in something. I'm like, hey, I saw this and it's a reputable, medical journal. Can you look into this? Like I say also for patients, don't be afraid to ask your care team questions. You can bring them information or send them to a link and say, is this true? Is this vetted? To make sure that you're both looking at vetted information.
I think that's such a good point. I think the thing that would make me the most upset is if patients left after I spoke to them not having their questions answered, or not having them answered in a way that they feel comfortable with decisions that we're making. And I think that's such an important point, and I'm so happy to hear that from an advocate standpoint, because if you're not getting the questions answered in a way that you feel like you should, no one should ever be upset if you want to go speak to another oncologist. In fact, most oncologists are very open to second and third opinions. At the end of the day, it's your life and your body, and you have to make all the right treatment decisions for yourself, and making sure that you are in a place where you feel like you have all the information. And to your point, there's a lot of unvetted information out there. There's a lot of pseudoscience. There's a lot of things, but I don't think the approach to combat that is, well, that's dumb, we're not going to talk about that. I think it should be, this is why this isn't necessarily proven, because there hasn't been any research, and you have to talk through that, and you have to find the right physicians that will talk through those things with you, because it's important.
Well, I mean, you're going into really like something else that we'd like to talk about is navigating the healthcare system, right? Like, Ruthie, I would love your thoughts on what was that like for you? Were you someone that really had utilized your insurance before a diagnosis, and how has that changed for you now?
Yeah, so I was a fairly compliant patient. Went to the annual doctor visits as normal. And so again, just because I was aware of my body and changes in my body, again, just grateful that when I felt the lump, it took me a month to go to the doctor, only because I had a trip planned. And so I was like, I'm going to take this trip. But again, at the time, I wasn't worried because I had no other symptoms, right? So in my mind, I just thought, just maybe it was a cyst. And it didn't hurt. Like, every time I pressed on it and I felt it, it didn't hurt. Visually, my breasts had not changed, if I look at myself in the mirror. And it also didn't protrude, right? So everything else could have led me to ignore my symptoms or ignore the lump. And so to answer your questions about navigating through the healthcare system, I think what was the challenge was now having this pretty serious diagnosis and navigating work, taking time off, having to fill out paperwork. And again, like I said, I was very grateful because this happened in the middle of the pandemic. And I know that a lot of folks have different stories about that because of what was going on then. Treatments, not treatments, but appointments were prolonged, right? We couldn't get to a physician or a provider. It may have taken 6 months, a year out. I mean, I've heard some really egregious stories, but that was just because of the time that we were in, right? And so luckily for me, that was not the case. My appointments came to me very quickly, and I can disclose I went through the Kaiser system and Emory Healthcare. So those were my providers here in Atlanta, Georgia. And while I was able to get the appointments, it's the time to make the decisions that was difficult, right? That was the pressure on top of the pressure of the diagnosis itself. It's the, because I would always ask the question, well, you give me these options, how much time do I have to think about it, right? And so, they were fairly honest with me. And so that was the part that I had to navigate on top of the anxiety. And then there are things where now you're dealing with the cost of care and your copays and medicine. And now this is not a regular doctor visit, right? And so having to navigate that, even though you have a support system, a lot of those calls have to be made by the patient. And that's what I have to remind people, that sometimes folks will be like, well, why didn't you call your patient navigator? Or why didn't you call the financial list or whatever? When you're in treatment and active treatment, not all of us tolerate that well. So a lot of the main symptoms that they say you're going to have, like the hair loss, the exhaustion, being tired, the chemo brain forgetfulness, Like you are having to deal with all of that and still manage your care, still having to try to remember these questions that you have to ask, or that you were supposed to follow up with X, Y, and Z by this date to fill this certain paperwork for work so that you can get the time off, so that you can heal from what you're going through. You know, a lot of that just can't always be done by somebody else in your family, like, because they're asking for date of birth, social security, you know, they're asking all these little demographic questions, and you just have to be present to do that. And so, and that's nobody's fault. That's just the way it's set up, right? That you have to advocate for yourself in those moments. But where it is helpful to have a support system is to have somebody with you, or, you know, do write down, take the notes when your mind is lucid, when you are not as sluggish and as tired, write down your thoughts. Having a notebook or a journal is super important. I advise folks to just don't walk around thinking that you're going to remember everything. And even in the visits themselves, you are bombarded with information. It's a lot. And you see, I see you shaking your head, Megan, because you know, they bombard you with information. Again, to a fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just that's the provider with the time that they have with you. They're trying to let you know, hey, this is what you have. This is what you can do, X, Y, and Z. And you're just sitting there and you're like, you know, you're shaking your head. You're like, okay, yes, doc, yes, doc. And you're trying to remember it all, but really it's like, if you can, I know I've heard that some providers are open or amenable to like reporting the conversation or the questions and answers that you all are exchanging, or having somebody with you to assist. And so, yeah, navigating the healthcare field can be daunting. It's never easy, but it's also a learning process too at the same time. Because if you weren't familiar with your deductibles, well, you're going to be very familiar very quickly, right? You're going to be very familiar with what your out-of-patient copay and max are, and when does the full insurance really kick in, you know, after so many surgeries, right? The other thing is the financial toxicity that comes with that, because we are being poked and prodded and tested so many times. MRIs here, ultrasound there, and every couple of months, maybe this has to happen. Or if we see something, now we can't ignore that mole because it could be something, you know, we just don't know. And so all of that does require the patient to become now a little bit more savvy with their plan if they have insurance, and so that they can navigate that as best as possible. Because a lot of times they'll tell you that you have a navigator, but sometimes you only meet that person once, and these people change. God bless you again if that person is with you throughout your whole process, but that was not the case for me. Anytime I met somebody, they would be like, oh, hey, Ruthie, I'm your person, and we're going to be together, and, you know, I'm going to be with you from point A to point B. Some of these folks, I only saw that one time, that one visit. And anytime I made phone calls, it was with somebody else. So we'll kind of be okay with that.
Right. Well,
you know.
Well, thank you so much, Ruthie. I'd love to hear from like the provider point of view, and what are ways that you have to navigate the healthcare system on behalf of your patients?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, definitely. You can go ahead, Matt.
I immediately thought of my disdain for insurance companies, but yeah, unfortunately, we have to do a lot of navigating insurance. There's a lot of times when things that are very much standard of care are just not covered, and insurance companies, despite, you know, my own personal opinion, that they are trying to reduce the cost of your care, and they will do that sometimes to the detriment of your workup and your management and your treatment. So I think, you know, that's where you need to advocate for yourself. You need to have a family that advocates for you. You need to have a treatment team that advocates for you, and not take no for an answer. Because, you know, I've had patients that have had very routine restaging scans get denied by insurance companies and require peer-to-peer conversations. And as tough as that is on everyone who already has a very busy day, that those are the important things that have to happen. And you know, it's unfortunate it's like that, but it is the situation that we're in most of the time.
Jasmin.
Yeah, I agree with Matt. That's definitely always one of the biggest hurdle. But then also the other thing is, especially like helping the patient navigating through the healthcare, especially with a cancer diagnosis. It's not just usually that you're just seeing the oncologist, it's also you're seeing the radiation oncologist. You have to get some imaging, you have to get your treatments, and it's a lot of like navigating and ensuring that the patient gets what he or she needs to get. And I think it's like a Swiss cheese, right? If you miss one thing, it can lead to like, build up like down the stream, and it can sometimes lead to events that we don't want. And the support staff that we have at the clinic to kind of like explain the patient that these are the steps that need to be taken. And then I feel like from a patient's perspective, especially when my family member was undergoing cancer treatment, I saw how it's easy sometimes for the healthcare provider to say like you need to do XYZ, but from a patient's perspective, it's very hard to understand like how all these things matter. And I feel like you find a way to
Oh,
like
kind of
take
losing
that.
you there.
Oh,
Can
can you
you
hear me?
repeat that? Yeah, can you repeat what
Yeah.
you just said?
What did you guys lose me?
That you have to the support staff or
Oh yes, I think like the support staff is really important in the which is part of the clinical team, and I think that's like where I'm kind of like hopeful with AI now, with the technology where we can use AI where they can help the patient navigate and explain the next steps, and as well as for us on the other side from healthcare provider perspective AI can help us with like scheduling, navigating, things like that. So it'll take a little bit of time because of all the regulation and ethical considerations that you have to take into consideration when using AI. But I'm very hopeful. And I feel like within the next year that there will be at least some advancements that will be helpful and useful for the patients and for the physicians with the use of AI.
and something else I wanted to add in navigating the healthcare system from the patient point of view and also as a caregiver, co-survivor, because my mother also has cancer right now, she's blood cancer, is you're hearing a lot of terminology that you've never heard before. You're learning how your insurance works and you're learning what good insurance is, what great insurance is, and what awful insurance is, right? But all of that to say, you have a lot of advocates. There are a lot of people out there who have been through it. Like that's how Ruthie found me, right? Because I'm very open as an advocate because I don't want anyone else to have to go through all of the hurdles I had to go through. I want to help try and pave that way and make it a little smoother for them. So a lot of times, like that's again when I see that value in social media or LinkedIn of people asking questions, and it's like, oh yeah, see if you have this or check out if you have that, because we've walked through it so we can, help you navigate a little bit better. And of course, a lot depends on where you're treated, right? In the country, et cetera, and even the type that you have. But there are certain things like you can get help. Like for me, a social worker, I just happen to have read every single sheet of paper I received after my diagnosis, and it was just all text. And if I hadn't been curious enough to be like, it says a social worker is assigned to my oncologist. What is that? I never heard of social worker in oncology before. So if I hadn't made that call, I would not have gotten all this financial help because I felt this huge burden. Because my first thought once I got that diagnosis, it wasn't like, oh my God, am I going to die? My first thought was, oh my God, how am I going to afford this? So I don't go into bankruptcy. That was literally my first thought. And that just killed me that any patient would think that way, because it should be about your health and focusing on, your treatments and getting through this. As we're getting close to time here, I'd love for each of you to give some like final thoughts on this World Health Day as we think about that healthy beginnings and hopeful future. What are like three things that you would want our listeners to take away from this conversation? Ruthie.
Sure. Again, just being aware of your body, right? No matter what your lifestyle is, it's just really number one, be aware of your body. And don't be afraid to have the conversation, because even certain diagnoses can bring on shame onto yourself, right? Because you always think of, well, what could you have done different or better or X, Y, and Z. And a lot of times that is not even a factor. And so don't hold it in yourself if something is off or not right with you. And if you don't even know how to articulate that, whoever is a person that you can talk to or that you can share with, let them know what's going on, and maybe they can help and encourage you to seek a medical doctor, have the appointment, and just rule it out. Just give yourself that opportunity. Secondly, I would say give yourself grace in all situations, right? As long as you're alive and breathing, you can always do better. So if you were a smoker yesterday, at some day, if it is your will to quit, it's possible, right? But give yourself grace to get to that point whenever you get to that point. And lastly, health is a gift. It is an absolute gift just to be able to wake up. It's an absolute gift, even in all of our challenges, because every one of us on this panel has a story. Every one of us has a situation or something that we're going through. And we always feel like we're alone and it's just us, because that's when you're with yourself. That's what it feels like. But literally when you open your mouth, you'll be surprised, like, oh yeah, I broke my ankle too. I've got tons of metal in my feet. Or, oh yeah, I skydived yesterday. You'd be surprised at how much more common, even as different as we all look and the experiences that we may have, but we are very much the same sometimes in our experiences. So it's a matter of giving ourselves grace. So thank you.
Thank you. Matt?
Oh, I think, this has been such an enjoyable conversation. And the thing that I would say is that you have to be your biggest advocate yourself. And you have to have a support system. So whether or not that's family, friends, I genuinely think one thing that you see over and over again that, I'm sure Jasmin would agree with, is that those who have supportive family members or friends or people that they can bring along on their journey with them do better. It's so important. And I think advocacy groups are so important. When we get back to talking about trials, testing, all these things that are so overwhelming to hear about, you're learning a whole new language when you're diagnosed with cancer. Tapping into a network of people where you will, not feel dumb asking questions. You'll feel like you're talking to people who've been in the exact same situation, I think is so important, and such a good resource that not enough patients take advantage of, but is there, and for lots of different tumor types, and is so important.
Jasmin?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like support groups are super important, especially like throughout the journey. Having a second set of ears or help when you're going through this difficult journey is definitely important. And I also think like the future of cancer, like research is more promising than ever with like the advancements in technology as well as the awareness that we have. And I feel like our patients are being more proactive now as well. And I think being an advocate for yourself is really, really important. And especially if you think like something is off, like reaching out to your physician is really, really important. And I think like what I'm also very excited is that now like research has become more patient-centered, like it's more based on incorporating real-world data as well as patient-reported outcomes and a focus on like what truly matters. So I think it's super exciting what's to come. And yeah, and overall this conversation has been really great.
And the final point I'll make is, trust your instincts, write down your questions. And what I would do is when you write down your questions for your appointment is star the top 3 that you're like, these are the ones that I need like answered before I leave today. And then the rest, utilize that portal. Because sometimes you're like, I don't really want to take up my whole appointment asking all of these little questions, but like highlight the top 3 that you feel are most important for that particular appointment. And then also 3, remember, at the end of the day, you matter. This is a partnership with you and your care team. So if you are feeling uncomfortable, then find someone who you can talk to there if you're scared to like bring that up. I know what that can be like, especially if you are Black or of color, and it can feel like, I don't know. It's okay. Ask, because at the end of the day, you need to be able to feel like you can trust your care team and that they're doing what's best for you. So thank you, everyone. Ruthie, Matt, Jasmine, you're amazing. I want to kick it back over to Kara, but also say a huge thank you to Oncology Data Advisors for letting us have this awesome conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Megzy. And thank you so much, everybody, for such an amazing discussion today. It was so wonderful to hear about your stories and experiences and just your insights on this World Health Day as we look ahead to a hopeful future. So thank you to the audience for tuning in today as well. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel to check out all the other videos and upcoming panels we have. So a huge thanks again to our panelists, and I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Okay, stream just ended.